Hello, my name's John, this is a Warhammer 40,000 Orc, and you're watching Wargames, Models, and Other Hobbies. Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be finishing my series of painting Warhammer 40,000 Orcs. The last thing to do for this squad is to paint the bases. As you can see from this Orc knob, I've already painted this base, just to show you the simple scheme that I use for most of my models. It allows me to add further details to them depending on whether the model's a character or it's a larger base or something like that. So what I'm going to be doing is running through each of the stages. I've pre-painted a selection of them, but just means that we can jump from one stage to another without having to wait for the paint to dry. As with all of my videos, this is going to be a real-time painting video, so what you see is what you get with this. The only time I'm going to cut the video is if I've got to go and answer the phone or answer the front door, and as always, apologies if you can hear traffic in the background. I do live on the edge of a road, and it can get quite busy sometimes. So here is one of the orcs from the last session. You can see that the base isn't painted on this one. I always like to do a base coat on the top of the base first before I put any texture paint or anything like that. And for that, I'm going to be using some Rhinox hide. And as with most of the painting, I'm not too worried if it's not too tidy, but I just want to make sure I don't get any of the brown paint onto the items I've already worked on. Now, as I said at the beginning, this is just my go-to generic base finish. I have used lots of different finishes in the past. This one just is nice and easy, really. You don't have to use as many paints and texture paints as I'm going to with it. You can just do a very simple kind of single texture paint and a single kind of dry brush or something like that, or leave it just as the texture paint. But I tend to do a base like this and then build up some texture, build up some washes, and then finish it off with a dry brush. But as you can see, for the first coat of paint for the base, it doesn't take too long to do. You just got to be careful not to go over any of the bits of the model that you've already painted. If you do, it doesn't matter too much, as long as you can try and wash it back a little bit with a bit of water. It then starts to look a bit like weathering. But there we go, there is the first base done with the Rhinox hide. So I'm going to put that to one side now, clean my brush, and then let's bring in another orc. The next paint I'm going to use is a little bit of Stirland mud. So this is a texture paint that you can make yourself, to be honest, with sand, sawdust, and a bit of paint. But I quite like these technical paints from Games Workshop. They give a nice finish quite quickly. And I use this one just to add a little bit of colour and texture to the model. I'm using a texture applicator, and all I'm going to do is put little bits like that on the base. And each model in this squad has had a different amount put on, but as you can see, I've just put that in 1, 2, 3, 4 places. Nothing overly complex, and that's it for that level. It's level, what am I talking about? For that stage. It's only a small part of the texture of this model. The main texture comes from the next layer that I'm going to work on. Let me just clean off anything from this texture applicator. Let's bring on the next model. You can see on this one that I've got a little bit of texture just here and some on the back. And what I'm going to be using now is the Agrillian Earth, which is one of the paints that cracks to look like dried, broken ground. And you can let this dry naturally, or you can dry it with a hairdryer, and you can see exactly how it kind of cracks. For now though, I'm just going to start pasting it on The thicker it is, the bigger the cracks on the surface you get, and the more defined. So I find that when I put it on in different thicknesses, just so I can get a varied base. And I'm going to use the applicator just to get close up to the edge of the model itself. I have to say, I've really enjoyed painting these models this month. I haven't had a chance to do a lot of hobby due to work being really busy, but having this project set over the whole of this month, I have done a few other things which I'll talk about in my hobby roundup this month, but it's mainly been working on these orcs, which we'll have a real good look at them in the hobby roundup this month, because it gives me a chance just to finish all the bases. I will at the end of this video have a little photo gallery, as I have been doing with this series. As you can see, that I've gone over the foot a little bit, but that doesn't matter in this case, as it'll just look like mud picked up by this character. Just making sure I've got it in frame. So you can use brushes to apply the texture paint, but I have to say I do quite like using these applicators. I use these applicators also for sculpting, as they give quite a nice kind of flat finish when you're putting details and things. But there is that base on there. Now I'm just going to wipe some of the excess paint off there. So there we go. That is the third stage on basing my models. Let's put that to one side and bring another one forward while I just quickly clean this applicator. They're not as easy to clean as brushes, but I tend to just rinse them off on water and then wipe them clean. So at the next stage, if we have a look at this, you'll see we've got all of that cracked earth. We've also got that slight texture of the Sterling mud. But I want to make a little bit more definition with these and also tie the two colours together. There's quite a distinctive difference between them at the moment. And the first step in that is using some Agrax Earthshade. You'll hear with this one I've put a little ball bearing in it to help mix it up as I shake it. Sometimes that really helps with the shades and the washes, as it does allow it to mix it quite a lot. And what I'm going to do with the Agrax Earthshade is just paint over the entirety of the base. And what this is going to do is just going to mellow the colour out slightly, as well as tie the colours together. Doesn't matter if I get this onto the model itself either, as it's just going to be an extra kind of layer of colour, dirt, weathering, that kind of thing. Now, if there's any other models you'd like me to run through how to paint, please drop it in the comments. If there's any specific things you'd like to know how I do, just put it down there. And likewise, while you're there, if you want to, a like and subscribe is always appreciated. That Agrax Earthshade went on really nice and quickly, so you can see that I've put it on there. And when that's dry, the next step is another wash, and that's going to be of Nuln Oil. So those are one of my two favourite, but Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil are some of my favourite washes, as it allows me to tie things together a lot. But yeah, as I was saying, if there's any models or things like that that you'd like to see how I'd go about painting them, drop it in the comments. I've realised recently that I've had Games Workshop as a hobby in my life for an awful long time now. I was very young when I was first introduced to it. I was about 4 or 5, through my dad, who used to cast cast pewter soldiers, and my brother had a few of the first edition Warhammer books and then some of the second edition stuff, and that was in the mid-80s. So I've realised now it's 2025, I've been doing it close to 40 years, if not more than 40 years. I started painting out with enamel paints and model kits, same way most people do, but yeah, I started collecting Games Workshop models way back then. There we go, I've painted the whole of that base with the Nuln Oil. And you can see how, although the Stirland mud is still quite dark, it starts to tie things together a little bit. Well, I feel it does anyway. So that's the wash. So here we have that Agrax Earthshade, and the Nuln Oil has dried on this one just here. The next stage, I go back to one of my other favourite paints, which is the Rakarth Flesh, and I do a dry brush with this over the whole base. And with this dry brush, it doesn't matter if it goes on the model in any way, it just adds to, like I've said before, weathering, ties the model to the base, and just brings it all together. So, as I said at the beginning, this is my go-to basing scheme for most of my models. I do change the colours out sometimes and change some of the textures out, but the thing I do like is having a common basing scheme allows all of the models I paint to tie in together, so they kind of look good next to each other and so on. So there we have that dry brush. You'll see I've missed a few little areas. It doesn't matter if that happens, as it just enhances any kind of shadows and things like that. But there we go, there is that base there. Let's just clean this dry brush. And now we have the final stage. The rim of the base, you can paint it pretty much any colour that you like. I prefer to have a black rim on my bases, but it's your own personal choice what colour you do for this. But for me, I'm going to be using some Abaddon black. Normally it takes about 2 coats to go over any of the white, but let's see how it goes this time round. I'm not even going to put it onto my palette. I've just got it loaded on my brush, and I'm just going to spread it around the base, and one brush load tends to do a coat of one of these bases, but like I said, sometimes you might need 2 coats, but it all depends on what colour you use for your primer as well. I like a white primer. I do occasionally use other colours, but I used to use black primer all the time, but I do like a white primer. I feel I can get a lot more depth to the colours that I'm working on, and it's also a lot easier to paint colours onto the white than it is to the black, but it's a personal preference. I'm going to work around the base a little bit. I'm going to have to give this another coat at some point, but I'm not going to worry right now for the video. Let's just clean my brush. And there we have it. Like I said, I'm going to have to give that another coat, but we've got that black rim around the base. Let's just bring some of the finished ones on. So I hope you've enjoyed this series. I quite like making it, painting up this whole squad so you can see how I go about doing it. Like I said, if there's any other models you'd like to see me paint, or convert or anything like that, drop it down in the comments. But for now, all I can say is thank you so much for tuning into the series. I'll leave a link in the description to the other videos, but for now, my name's John, and you've been watching Wargames, Models, and Other Hobbies.